All right, we are back here on the podcast. We talked some Giants offseason last week. This week, we're touching in on the Jets here. Joining me today, great friend of the podcast, the host of the Locked On Jets podcast, John Butchko, is back with us. John, welcome. How are you?
Mike, great to be back. Always great to chat with you.
Always great to chat with you here. And obviously, when we talked, I think, prior to the season, I don't think we could have had any idea this season could have gone as badly as it did for the Jets, where we have the coach fired in week 5. We have the GM fired after the bye week. We have Aaron Rodgers play all 17 games and they can win 5, which is something we not have expected. Also, the chaos on the locker room, social media here. I think it's the most disappointing season the Jets have ever had, in your opinion.
It's up there. I mean, I think it's up there with 1999. That was a year where the Jets were coming off an AFC Championship game berth, but that was a year where Vinny Testaverde went down with an Achilles injury week 1. Obviously, that did not happen to the Jets in 2024. It did in 2023. I think you said it right. I remember when we last spoke, it was during the summer, it was before the season, and there was a path for the Jets season to be unsuccessful, but that was more along the lines of, maybe they win 7 games or 8 games or something like that. I don't think anybody saw this team being out of the playoff race before October, at least with Aaron Rodgers staying healthy and starting every game. If Aaron Rodgers got hurt again, then maybe you could see a 5-win season. But, I think even the most pessimistic prognostications before the season would not have guessed it would be this bad.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And I think the other wild thing here, too, I think the comparison 99, is comparing 99 more to last year, where it was sort of they had, the chance to get in, they didn't do it. This year kind of stands on its own just because, there was so much out of chaos here. We had sniping from players with fighting fans on social media. This is all sorts of made as a very unlikable bunch, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you make a good point. The other thing about the 99 team is they actually rallied late in the season. They got off to a bad start after Vinny Testaverde went down, and they ended up finishing 8-8, which 8-8 is obviously not a great record, but from where they were well under 500 at the start of the year. They got hot late in the season. And Bill Parcells actually said that was his best coaching job ever. Whereas, like you said here, this was not a team that really had anything redeemable about it. I think one of the things that made this really difficult for Jets fans is normally there's something you can point to in a losing season. You can point to the development of some young player. With all due respect to Olu Fashanu, who I think played well the second half of the year, that really didn't happen this year. It's not like you're rebuilding. It's not like, I mean, I know you got a high draft pick, but it's not like you got a franchise-changing draft pick. This was all in. Everybody made a big deal out of it. The phrase you heard over and over from the Jets was all in. And they went all in, and they went bust. They lost everything. And it's not even I think back to 2011, the famous Eagles Dream Team, or, Washington in 2000, where they brought in huge names like Deion Sanders that offseason. The Jets are similar to those types of busts from the standpoint that those teams had Super Bowl expectations. They finished with losing records, but at least those teams actually had moments where they looked as good as they were advertised to be. There were, those teams went on winning streaks, and there were stretches within those seasons where those teams looked really good. This Jets team was really bad from start to finish. I mean, the only really good game that they played all season long from start to finish was week 3 against New England, where they beat a really bad Patriots team. The rest of the way, I mean, they even the games they won, they didn't look great. They played a very mediocre game week 2 against Tennessee. Halloween night against Houston, they played a great second half and a horrible first half. So this team really didn't show any high level potential. There are cases where a team looks really good for stretches but can't sustain it. This Jets team never even really looked that good.
Yeah, that's true here. And obviously, you also had the off the field tumble with the Woody Johnson stuff. We had multiple reports this season from The Athletic about how much he meddled the situation. We had a report about how he was quote unquote joking about wanting to bench Aaron Rodgers after week 4. We have the stuff about Brick Johnson, his son, basically giving him suggestions, Madden ratings involving in trades. We have him probably telling Mike White under his breath that he sucked last year after he lost the game against Buffalo 2 years ago. So we're taking all this stuff with the Woody stuff from The Athletic about how involved he is in meddling at the football operations.
Well, I can't comment on any of the specific stories, how true any of them were, but one thing that seems to happen a lot with the Jets is there's some story that sounds too outrageous to be true, and people dismiss it, and then a few weeks later it comes out that it actually was true. I mean, the Jets did confirm some of this stuff on the record. I mean, the Jets did confirm. The Jets did not deny this stuff about Woody Johnson saying Aaron Rodgers should be benched. They just said, "Oh no, it's not a big deal." He took it out of context. The same thing with Brick Johnson, Woody's son, and I think actually both of the athletic report said that both of Woody's sons are offering him insight, and then he's bringing these up in meetings. And the Jets said something like, "Well, it's not what decides everything; it's just a reference point." I mean, I don't know how the owner's two teenage sons anything that they say should even be brought up. And I get the feeling Woody Johnson doesn't understand that as the boss, if he's bringing up points to his general manager that his sons have brought him, that's a big deal. I think the biggest thing, though, the thing that really kind of set this on a bad course was when they fired Robert Saleh. And I don't think Robert Saleh was a very good head coach. I thought he should have been fired after 2023. But there's an old expression, I think, in aviation is that, you have to keep flying the plane if you're a pilot. And, even if the engine is blown out, the only chance you have to survive is to just continue flying the plane. The Jets were, when the Jets fired Saleh, they were 2-3. They had shown some issues. Saleh had obviously not done a very good job. But people in the locker room have said that really pretty much just finished off any chance they had of recovering because it was so random. It was the type of move that just led to it just felt like a panic move. It was disruptive because you took Saleh away from the defense, and that Jeff Ulbrich has to become the head coach while he's also in charge of the defense. It was just a very disruptive move, and I don't think Woody Johnson thought through what kind of an impact is this going to have on the defense. And that's Bill Belichick said something on ESPN this year with the Jets and Woody Johnson. It's always ready, fire, aim. And that's a perfect example of that. I think anybody who's watching this would have to acknowledge Woody Johnson has been a problem and one of the big impediments to the Jets' success. I mean, team has missed the playoffs 14 straight years. They've changed players, they've changed coaches, they've changed general managers. The only thing that's been common is the ownership. And I know Woody wasn't here for 4 years because he was the ambassador to the UK, but he put his brother in charge. The Johnson ownership is the only thing that's been consistent through these 14 years. So at some point, you have to say, ownership it may be the number one problem.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think the Saleh point is definitely where the season broke. And I know you and I are kind of agreeing where he kind of showed last year that it didn't deserve to be a spot where he should have been brought back. But the idea of firing him after week 5 when they're 2-3, they're a game out of first, at the Bills coming to town on Monday night, that to me just screamed that the game was in London. They lose to the Vikings. Woody Johnson got embarrassed in front of his rich friends, decided to take it out on Robert Saleh as opposed to actually making a logical football move.
Yeah, what's amazing with the Jets is they can't do the most basic things right. They can't fire people who aren't effective at the right time. You go back to 2019 with Mike McCagnon, who really did not do a very good job during his tenure. They brought him back at a point where the Jets had among the most cap space in the league. They spent, which I believe was, at that point, a record amount of guaranteed money in free agency. They had the number 3 overall pick, which McCagnon, to his credit, did hit. It was Quinn and Williams. But then they fire him after the draft. And Chris Johnson, who was in charge at that point because Woody was in the United Kingdom, essentially said, well, we did a deep dive, but we realized McCagnon wasn't that good, which is an amazing thing to do after you let him run such a consequential offseason. You look at the first 5 games, and I don't think Saleh did a good job the first 5 games, but this is the point I made at the time. Nothing Saleh did wrong in the first 5 games was a surprise. Every single flaw he showed during that first month of the season was a flaw that previously existed. There's nothing new in those first 5 games of 2024. Every single thing he had shown that was bad about him, bad about the way he managed the team, was evident in 2023 and 2022 and 2021. So I sit there and ask, if you knew that these things were issues, why didn't you just make the change last year? And you could have gone out, maybe gotten Jim Harbaugh, maybe gotten, a better coach. You want to talk about the impact ownership has. That's it. It's not just firing people; it's firing people at the right time, making a change when it needs to be made.
Yeah, another good point there. Mike Vrabel's a guy who they really wanted this year. They could have had him last year if they acted decisively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. In terms of the GM and head coach searches here, and we are basically, I know they had a big head start because they fired by early here. They are going through the most drawn out process outside maybe Chicago I've seen, where they've interviewed at least in the teens for both GM and head coach candidates here. So What's your take on this process here? Because I mean, this feels like very, very drawn out for like what, and somebody at organization that knew they had to make changes in the middle of November.
Yeah, I think one thing to remember is that even though they had a bit of a head start because they fired Saleh in October and Joe Douglas in November, they were not allowed to begin interviewing candidates for either head coach or general manager who are employed by an NFL team until the end of the regular season. So they were able to make their requests early. You know, it seemed like they were the most organized team making requests on Black Monday, but it's not as big of a head start as people thought it would be. Now, as you know, Mike Tannenbaum is part of this search, big part of this search. He's helping to lead it along with Rick Spielman, the former Vikings general manager. Back in 2009, Tannenbaum led the search for a new Jets head coach. It was a very thorough process, and it was very similar. They interviewed a lot of candidates. I don't think that at this point, at least, and look, this could change in a week or two. I don't think the timeline is that out of line. I know New England hired Vrabel. I know Tennessee has got its new GM in place, but most of the teams that are looking for somebody are still looking. A lot of the rules have prevented, some of the rules have prevented the Jets from interviewing coaches in person. They've been able to do virtual interviews with some coaches who are in the playoffs. So I don't think I know there's a lot of trepidation in the fan base right now. I don't share it to that extent, at least at this moment. Now we'll see what the next week or two brings. The one thing I'd question though is why you're bringing in candidates like, Mike Locksley from the University of Maryland or Rex Ryan. And look, I love what Rex Ryan did in 2009 and 2010, but he hasn't coached in 8 years. But you're not bringing in candidates like Todd Monken or Mike McCarthy. And look, I think Mike McCarthy has his flaws, but he's a coach who's got a 600 winning percentage, has been an NFL coach 18 years. To cast this wide of a net, not even speak to him, I find that a bit puzzling. So that I don't mind the process. My questions would be more with the specifics of the candidates they're interviewing and not interviewing.
I think it falls more in Woody Johnson's comfort level in terms of like every coach he's ever directly hired has been like a first-time defensive head coach, a first-time defensive coordinator here, and like he is not like these big offensive names, especially after Adam Gase's failure. I feel like they've been very hesitant to go back down that road.
Yeah, you might be right, and I do think there's something to the idea of him always hiring a first-time head coach. If you look at the Jets during Woody Johnson's 2.5 decades running this team, there's never been like one person who's been in charge. It's always been done by committee. You have a lot of these situations where the GM and the head coach are hired separately and they have to work together, but one doesn't really have control over the other. They both report to Woody. There've been a number of instances where a head coach is hired, but on the condition you have to keep this coordinator. I mean, that happened with Rex Ryan in 2009. You had to keep Brian Schottenheimer. 2019, it was heavily implied that Adam Gase, one of the reasons Adam Gase got the job was he was willing to take Greg Williams as the defensive coordinator. I mean, you can actually go back. The first hire that the Jets made in the Woody Johnson era was Herm Edwards. And at that point, the Jets hired Ted Cottrell to be their defensive coordinator. Cottrell was also a candidate for the head coaching job. Herm Edwards was a defensive guy, and Ted Cottrell was also a defensive guy. They had very different styles of defense that they wanted to run. And the two of them never really meshed. And the rumor has always been that, these were kind of like the two top candidates. So the Jets thought they could hit a grand slam and get both of them. They never had, but there's never like that one person who's in charge of the organization, whether it's the GM or the head coach. It always seems like everything's done by committee. And I think that's part of the reason the Jets always go with these first-time head coaches, because somebody with an established background can come in and demand control. Jets never hire somebody who can come in with the credibility, with the track record that they can demand control right off the bat.
Yeah, at least under Woody, because I know Parcells was the Leon Hess era, but like that's the last time they've really done something like that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's that was, you're right, that was Leon Hess, and Leon Hess just got so tired of losing that he gave Bill Parcells whatever he wanted. And Jets fans, I always hear this from Jets fans, well, we just need to find the next Parcells, but that's like the equivalent of Andy Reid deciding I don't want to be with the Chiefs anymore and I want to go coach the Jets. I mean, Parcells was on that level, so I almost think that if Bill Parcells is going to walk through this door, I hear I would love it. I love for it to happen. Jets fans always talk about, always compare their situation with 1997, but that's just a lot to ask.
Yeah, there's a lot to happen here. And let's go on the search here. The GM search, it seems like we've heard some rumors about Hallaby from the Eagles. We heard one of the Packer execs impress them. So, like, what are you hearing about the GM search? Who do you think that they're leaning towards?
It's a good question. It seems like there are all sorts of names out there. I think Hallaby is a really interesting candidate because he's a guy who's been one of the driving forces behind the Eagles integrating analytics and advanced numbers like stuff like that. And I kind of think that's the direction the NFL is going in. I think there's a lot of misperceptions about the role analytics plays. A lot of people think like, oh, we're going to fire all the scouts. We're just going to do everything by spreadsheet. That's not what's going to happen. That's not what the Eagles do. The Eagles do a lot of traditional scouting. What you're looking for is you're trying to like really study the league and find little advantages. Sometimes that's in game strategy. Sometimes that's how do you address a certain situation. Sometimes it's just okay. The running back prospects who have succeeded historically have these traits, so you can look for these traits. One of the things with the Jets is they're always very, very reactive. They're always like among the last teams to adopt the trend. The Wildcat came into the league and really took it by storm in 2008 with the Dolphins. In 2012, the Jets were trading Tim Tebow to run the Wildcat. They're Jets are always behind the curve. So I think Hallaby would be interesting from the standpoint that it'd actually be one of the rare instances where the Jets would be trying to be kind of trendsetters and get ahead of the curve. There are a couple candidates. It's really difficult to say though because there's lots of conflicting rumors out there. So I think we'll know more in the days ahead because I would presume the Jets are going to do a second round of general manager interviews. I think the first round was kind of to weed out the guys who really aren't contenders. So it's not a great answer to your question, but I think it's kind of to be continued.
Yeah, I think the coaching search is more clear at this point. I know they've talked to a lot of people. Like, I know they like Josh McCown, but I don't think they want to have Josh McCown be a first-time head coach. I think that's too aggressive for Woody's nature here. It seems like the leaders, the clubhouse, correct me if I'm wrong here, feels like Aaron Glenn has the job if he wants it. And there's obviously competition with Glenn with the Saints. And if he does, it feels like they want to go with Brian Flores. I feel like, am I reading this incorrectly? Those seem to be the two favorites of the Jet job.
I don't know if you're reading it incorrectly, but that's also my read on the situation. And you think about, you have to put yourself in Woody Johnson's mind. What are the things Woody Johnson wants? Well, as we talked about, first of all, he tends to want a first-time head coach because he doesn't want to give over total control. The second thing Woody Johnson wants, he wants good headlines. And, the stories write themselves. Aaron Glenn, a guy who was defensive coordinator for one of the best teams in football this year. I know, terrible divisional round. The defense didn't play well, but guy did a lot, helped his team get through a lot of adversity this year. Did a pretty good job, but also a guy who was a legend during his playing career. He was a great corner for the Jets. So I tend to agree. It seems like Aaron Glenn's the favorite right now, and if not, then maybe they go for Brian Flores. And then it seems like, at least the buzz is that everyone else is kind of a level below those guys.
Yeah, it also feels like your point earlier about the wide net. It makes you wonder, like, if they are pointing towards a guy like Glenn, they're trying to, as you said, sort of help fill out his own staff because they don't trust Glenn's ability to have connections around the league to get the right hire. So maybe some of these guys you're seeing interview for these jobs are like guys you might bring in with different titles to get them in the building and help fill out Glenn's coaching staff.
Yeah, I always wonder if a guy like Josh McCown, part of me wonders, are they interviewing him to potentially be an offensive coordinator? Because he does have ties to the Johnson brothers. He was a quarterback for the Jets for 2 years, but you can't interview Josh McCown for an offensive coordinator job. You can interview him for a head coaching job. You can kind of chat with him and pick his brain about that. And I think one of the challenges with somebody like Glenn is he obviously comes from Detroit, but Ben Johnson sounds like he's going to get a head coaching job. So Ben Johnson's probably going to take a coach or two from the Lions staff to work on the offensive side of the ball with whatever team he works for. Then the Lions will need to replace Ben Johnson. So it's an open question. Like, will any of the Lions offensive coaches be accessible to Glenn? And that kind of leads to the question of who his offensive coordinator is going to be.
Yeah, it's definitely a great question here. I do think that's the situation here. I do feel like also Flores might bring McCown with him as an OC potentially. So that's something I would keep an eye on there. But whoever comes in got a big choice to make on Aaron Rodgers here. And Rodgers has been going around his media tour basically saying, like, I'm open to coming back, but not up to me. The new guy's got to come in. The owner wants to come in here. I think the fascinating thing here is, like, we've heard some rumblings on Rodgers that some of these candidates, whether it's Flores or it's Glenn, are open to taking Rodgers back, but Woody wants no part of him. So I think that'll be interesting to see if, like, They come in, they say, we want Aaron Rodgers back, and Woody says no.
Yeah, it certainly would be. I get the sense that this is good. That the Rodgers Jets relationship is at an end, though. I mean, if it's kind of fun under the radar. Rodgers is taking a lot of passive aggressive shots at Woody, not unjustly, I would say. And yeah, there are all kinds of reports that that relationship is just severed. I think the Jets just need to move on, though, because I don't think Aaron Rodgers can ever be a bridge quarterback in this situation. I mean, you spent 2 years literally customizing the team to everything Aaron Rodgers wanted. This is not a case where he's becoming, it's one thing if like your guy goes to a new team and he knows his role is to be a bridge quarterback. Aaron Rodgers, everything about the Jets has been built around Aaron Rodgers these last 2 years. So I think to ask him to take a secondary role, I just don't know how realistic that is. I mean, do you think he's going to be okay with cutting out Lazard? Do you think he's going to be okay moving forward without Devontae Adams? I really don't. So I think that the Jets need to move on without Rodgers, and that doesn't even go into the finances because if you bring Rodgers back, it's another $37.5 million. His dead money hit goes over $60 million in 2026 if he returns to 2025 and then retires. So my view is the Jets just need to move on without him.
Yes, for sure here. And obviously, another big offseason development this new GM is going to have here is who to try to extend from the 2022 draft class. I think there's universal approval from the Jet fans that Garrett Wilson's the guy they want to keep. The love for Sauce Gardner soured a bit after this year, so that one is interesting. Jermaine Johnson come off the Achilles. Breece Hall had a down year by his standards here. So how do you think they're going to handle these 2022 draftees? I think number one order of business would be try and extend Garrett Wilson, but he's kind of giving out different spokesignals about whether he's interested in long-term talks or not.
Well, I think that's another reason that Rodgers can't come back because it seems like something was going on there between him and Rodgers, especially after Devontae Adams was acquired. Rodgers is always going to favor Adams, and it seemed like that did not sit well with Garrett Wilson. I think the first move is you try and get Garrett Wilson extended on a long-term deal because, you've seen what the Jets quarterback situation has been the last 3 years, but he was over 1,000 yards in all 3 seasons, a legitimate number one receiver. To me, this is an easy move if he wants to come back. I think the Garrett Wilson situation has to be resolved one way or another this offseason. If he's willing to take a long-term deal, you've got to bring him back. You've got to lock him up long-term. I think that's essential. If the rumblings are true that he just wants out, well, his value is never going to get higher because he still has one last year on his rookie contract where he's cheap, and he will have Jets will pick up his 5th-year option this year. So I think it has to be resolved one way or another. I think you mentioned Sauce Gardner did not have a great season. I think after his first 2 years, though, there was enough good there that maybe just write this off. There were lots of Jets who had bad seasons. I wonder to what extent some of the bigger name players on the team were just kind of caught in the undertow of the team's overall dysfunction. A shutdown corner is a rare commodity in this league. I think there are less than 10 shutdown corners in the league, and Sauce Gardner is one of them. So I would try and lock Sauce Gardner up. Jermaine Johnson's a tougher decision because he's coming off an Achilles injury. I think you might want to wait and see on Jermaine. And then Breece Hall, I think what really complicates the calculus with Breece Hall is just the fact he's a running back, and teams don't like to pay running backs. Now, will that change this year, or after watching the success of Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs getting big money contracts? Perhaps, but I think the positional value there makes it a question. I think the Breece Hall is a guy who the Jets may look to keep if he's at the right number, but if he wants more than that, then maybe you let him play the season out.
Yeah, I think the Wilson thing, I think the way you kind of say is that, you think, if he does not want to sign on the bottom line, that the Jets, explore trades. I don't necessarily agree with that because, we've seen this far too often with the Jets and with guys around the league that, if they're unhappy, we've seen it with the Bengals with T. Higgins, too. The Jets basically have control of Garrett Wilson for 3 years. This year, the 5th-year option, a franchise tag here. And, trading away guys is not guarantee you get guys as good as them. We saw when the Jets did with Darrelle Revis. As soon as he threw a fit, he wanted out. They traded away. They got basically nothing of equal value in return. So I think, I don't think trading Garrett Wilson should be on the table, especially, if a guy in this meeting, any of these GM candidates says, I would trade him. I don't think I would continue that conversation.
I would say, so I don't disagree with you. Just to clarify what I'm saying, I'm only doing that if Garrett Wilson says there is no way I'm extending here. My first, second, and third option, though, would be to extend Garrett Wilson longer term. You're absolutely right. Look, if you I think everything you said is accurate. I think that's why the objective should be to lock Garrett Wilson up long term, because you get draft picks back, you don't know whether it's going to work. It's the old, I don't know if you remember the first season of Family Guy. There's an episode where Peter Griffin has an option. He could get a boat or a mystery box, and he chooses the mystery box because it could be anything, even a boat, and he always wanted a boat. That's what I always think about when you trade these players for draft picks. But I think that if you get into a situation where Garrett Wilson just says, I don't want to be here anymore, there's no way I'm re-signing long term, that's the point where I'd look at making a deal. And look, you're right. I mean, Darrelle Revis was a good example of a deal that didn't work out that great for the Jets. But on the other side, Garrett Wilson was drafted with a pick the Jets got for Jamal Adams, who was in a similar situation after his third year. So I think you play it by ear. I think you have to look at the situation. My preference, strong preference, would be to get him locked up after this. Get him locked up this offseason, though.
Yeah. Okay. Two other things, real quick. Free agency here, obviously. The money is not as big as you would think it would be here with the situation. You're going to make some cuts, maybe some guys coming off this roster here. Like, where do you think they're going to try attacking in free agency? Because, like, I think obviously they probably want to keep Morgan Moses, keep the line together as best they can. Like, they need players defensive side of the ball. Where do you think they look in free agency?
I think it's going to be a very cautious year in free agency. Jets have a lot of dead money coming due. One of the things about going all in is that I think that was always part of the equation was that 2025 was always going to look like a lean year, and the Jets can unclog their cap in one off season if they just take a cautious approach. But I think most of the focus is going to be just on retaining their own guys. Getting that 2022 draft class locked up. Also, you have to consider that Elijah Vera Tucker's entering his contract year. Jamian Sherwood, who just had an outstanding season and was voted team MVP, is a free agent. So I think that. And this is one of the luxuries of having a new GM is that there's usually not a lot of pressure to win year one. I think that the Jets may take some low cost flyers. I think you'll see some guys in here on 1 year deals, but I don't think the Jets are going to be in on the big names in free agency.
Yeah, it makes some sense here. And the last thing, obviously, is the draft, because the Jets are sitting there like in the middle of a top 10. They're going to be out of range of the core. That's probably a good thing. Considering this class is not that great. I feel like Jet Twitter might explode if they take another defensive lineman. That's a strong possibility. What do you think they do with that first pick in the draft that they have?
Yeah, the thing is, though, the defensive line is not a strength anymore. So I would love to. I actually would love it if they drafted Mason Graham out of Michigan. I think that pairing him with Quinton Williams would be great. You're right, because the Jets always draft defensive tackles, but in the first round, and I know the fans don't like it, but the defensive line was not good this year. And Quinton Williams had a down season. Will McDonald had a nice year too, at double-digit sacks, but after that, it got really shaky. But I actually think unless it's the receiver out of Arizona, it's probably going to be a defensive player because that's just where the strength of the draft is lining up. I get the feeling Abdul Carter might be a little bit out of the Jets' range, although I think he'd be a perfect fit. But it's one of the things I always say with the Jets. And unfortunately, maybe one day I won't be able to say it. When you get to the draft, it's kind of convenient because when you have so many needs, that it's pretty much a lock that the best player available is going to fit one of your needs.
Yeah, it is for sure. We'll see what happens to the Jets this offseason. It'll be a very important one for them. John, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People follow social media and keep up with all your Jets coverage. How can I do that?
So just head over to ganggreennation.com. It's where I write, and subscribe to the Locked On Jets podcast, which is available wherever you can find podcasts.
Absolutely, John. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, Mike. Always a pleasure to be on.